They're somewhat relieved, a German government spokesperson has said, after the second round of legislative elections in France saw the far-right National Rally there defeated. The National Rally, or Rassemblement National, took a surprise third place on Sunday after many had expected it to claim the most seats in Parliament. Instead, a left-wing alliance emerged as the biggest group and now has to try and form a government. How difficult will that be? And what does all of this mean for one of France's closest allies, Germany? Tobias Bacherle is a member of the German Green Party in the Bundestag, the German Parliament, and sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So, Mr. Bacherle, what was your reaction on Sunday night and what are your thoughts now?
Yeah, when I saw the first exit polls, of course, I was relieved. And as always, I kind of doubted the first exit polls as well. But I was already saying if this stays until the very end of the counting process, then it's a good day for Europe. I do see that many in Germany were also skeptical because, of course, with Mélenchon, there is one very influential politician in the Nouveau Front Populaire that is quite controversial, and I think we have to see that. But since it was clear,
can we just say that you're talking about Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's of course the leader of La France Insoumise, so essentially France Unbowed, we can call them LFI just to make it easier. Jean-Luc Mélenchon is somebody who is known for essentially hating the European Union and hating its strongest economy, Germany. And this is probably what you were referring to.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's very important to see that with the new left bloc, that there are also other forces, other parties, last but not least, also the Greens within that left bloc. So, of course, it was a mixed reaction in Germany, and I do see that. But since it was clear that France is having snap elections, the biggest fear, of course, was that the right-wing extremists are going to have a majority, are going to get into government. Worst case would have been alone. And still, we are now having quite a difficult situation right now, not only for France itself to form a government, but also for Europe itself, because you mentioned the LFI and their position on the European Union. But still, when you don't see let's not take the very bigger picture, of course, it's still a troubling situation. But when we see what was the best possible outcome, I would really argue that was the outcome we got yesterday.
But how likely is it that Jean-Luc Mélenchon will actually become prime minister?
That's very hard to tell from I don't even want to say from outside France. It's probably also very hard to tell from inside France. In general, I think the huge challenge right now for France is that they are not used to form coalitions, and they don't have a history in forming coalitions. But this is going to be necessary now. And the very interesting part is going to be whether the left bloc is going to stand firm as a bloc or whether they're going to join individually into a coalition. But I really would argue that's very hard to tell what the next days will come or will bring. But of course, I do see that the challenge Mélenchon would bring with him in this position, they would be, of course, huge. So I do see quite some chances that also other people or other parties will win this. It's not a race anymore, but this political negotiations in the end.
Now, all those parties that joined forces, including your sister party, essentially, the Greens in France, they joined forces with one goal: to prevent the far right from taking too many seats in Parliament. Was that worth it, all those concessions? They couldn't even agree on one candidate who is now going to be proposed as the potential new prime minister.
Yes, of course, because we have to be honest. And I think this is the warning signal that comes from this election. The far right are still on the rise. They did not, the worst case scenario did not happen. But that does not mean that the RN did not win a lot of seats. It does not mean that they became normalized. And I think this is a huge challenge. And I saw Tusk tweeting that Moscow is now not happy with this outcome of the election. And I think this is definitely right. With Moscow, they're certainly disappointed that their plan on getting a right-wing troublemaker government installed in Europe against Germany, but also against many other democratic forces within Europe, that was not successful. But what was successful was a polarized nation in France. And I would argue this polarization we're facing all over Europe. And this normalization, I think it's incredibly important to understand that we need to stand firmly together against right-wing extremism, but also we need to understand it's sadly, not an embarrassment anymore to vote for right-wing extremists, to vote for fascists, or at least for people who play with fascist narratives and so on. And I think we need to grasp that. So there is, of course, as I said, this huge task to stand together where I would argue absolutely it was worth it. But on the other hand, we also need to understand how we need to tackle that by arguing with right-wing extremist arguments. This is frustrating that it has come to the point where you really need to challenge the core of their identity, the core of their argument. But I believe, as frustrating as it is, it's not enough anymore to label them as right-wing extremists or to declare them or also to prove that they're right-wing extremists and maybe even enemies of our democratic system. All of this is not enough anymore. It's really important that we stick together and explain and talk about how dangerous the policies are, the racist policies, that they are not only targeting minorities, which is already horrific enough, but that those attacks are in the end attacks against us all.
Now, one thing is, of course, to explain the dangers of far-right speech and of, like you say, racist ideology. But there are reasons why people go to the ballot box and actually cast their votes for far-right parties, because some of them feel left behind by essentially the more established democratic parties who need to deliver. So what does France need to do now to win those people back, also by essentially presenting good policies?
I think this is a very challenging question, because if we compare France to many other economies, they managed to come through the pandemic and also through the energy crisis we had in Europe quite well. But quite well compared to the rest of Europe. And I'm saying this also from a German perspective, because we were depending on Russian gas way more than other countries, and above all also than France. This is still challenging. And I think this is incredibly important. We need to acknowledge that people are struggling, are challenged by rising prices, above all from the energy sector. And this, combined with the challenges we all faced throughout the pandemic, this is very, very dire situation for many people. I completely understand that. And therefore, I think it's very important that we focus a lot on policies that are fighting inflation. As I said, France was on a way that was not too bad. And I would also argue in Germany right now, we fought the inflation very, very well. We are down almost again to 2%. I think 2.2% was the last month, little June, that was measured. But still, now being back at a point that's manageable does not mean that the last 2 years are forgotten or also are, when it comes to inflation and what people are able to afford, that they are caught up on. And I think this is the biggest challenge we're facing. It's incredibly important. And when we look into the big cities, we are having a housing crisis. Also, Germany and France have that in common. And those are really big challenges that we need to face. And although those are complicated issues, I think this is also important to acknowledge. There's no easy solution. I think, first of all, it's really, really important to acknowledge that those are challenges that people are facing in their everyday life. And those are challenges people cannot kind of turn away from, because it's really, really in their everyday life. And second of all, that we look for solutions and we advertise on those solutions, and also advertise on those solutions not only on, well, this is now for a year or something that we help you, but also try to really manage to get inflation down permanently again.
And for all of that, the more centrist parties argue you need more European integration. You need to work more closely together. That is what the government that your party is a member of here in Germany argues. The Greens here in Germany are part of that three-way coalition with Chancellor Olaf Scholz, of course. How difficult is that going to be if, coming back to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, we get a government in France that says we need to focus more on national interests again? Is there a risk that the next French government is going to reduce European integration, do you think?
Yes, this risk is always there. I think why I'm still joyful about the result yesterday is the risk is definitely not as big as it would have been with the right-wing extremists being in government. And I think most importantly, I don't really, this is very difficult situation. I really don't know what's going to be the outcome of those governmental negotiations are going to be. But anyway, those critical voices, European skeptical voices, are not going to be alone in government. And if we look at the NFP, there are parties in there that are really firmly on the pro-European side. So I think this is rather showing how hard this election result made the situation to form a government, rather now for us to have heavy speculations on it. And last but not least, I think having European integration is one part of how we can work together in Europe, and on other parts, I believe there's a big chance to have when it comes to policies, actually, to implementing European policies, to have to have negotiations in the council, and also to try to get majorities there for progressive ideas. There could still be a chance, but all of that, really, I'm saying that very, very skeptical on the outcome of whatever government we're going to get. So I think it's really hard. And I would really say we need to look very closely. And maybe one last part that I believe is important for whatever outcome we're seeing when it comes to the French elections, but it's also in common for the US elections, where we have another partner struggling with their electoral outcome, or at least I would struggle with at least one electoral outcome. It's incredibly important to stay in contact very, very closely, to understand where our common interests are going to be, where we can work together, and not only leave it to a single political dimension where maybe you have a problematic partner. And in France, as I said, whatever comes out, it's going to be a very diverse government. So it's incredibly important to try and to understand that government and to be in very, very good personal contact with our colleagues in parliament, with our colleagues in the government, to have as much cooperation as possible.
We also have to add that France could well see a technocratic government in power if negotiations turn out to be too difficult. We already know that Gabriel Attal, the current prime minister, is going to stay on. He offered his resignation on Sunday after the results, but the French president refused and has kept him in power for now. Also partly because of the Olympic Games. France needs stability is the message from the Elysée. One last question, Mr. Bacherle, on the implications for Germany. Is this strategy of joining forces of very unlikely coalition partners a strategy that you and other democratic parties are now considering also to keep the far-right AfD party at bay here in the federal elections next year?
When it comes to working together, when it comes to policies, definitely. I think when it comes to running, it's a bit more difficult because we have a different electoral system. And I think it's the having a second round is very suitable for having such a coalition because it's easy to determine who is going to run in which district because you have the first round. You can basically say we're all going to run in the first round, and then in the second round, everyone draws back. Only the first who came in first of this wide coalition is going to run into the second round, which was very successful in most cases in France. We don't have that in Germany. So I think practically that makes it difficult, but also when it comes to mobilization, because mobilizing your voters because you agreed on we came in third, we came in fourth is easier, or at least I would believe, and I would argue is easier than basically telling them we're not even running. Please vote for the others. But in our German system, with our 2 votes, please vote for the others. But with your second vote, please vote for us and still do that. And even with our new electoral system, it becomes a bit more complicated regarding such a front or a coalition building. So as much as I admire that, and I believe that when it comes for elections of mayors, when it comes on elections for in many parts of Germany's so-called Landräte that are also kind of mayors for a district.
So districts.
So when it comes to them, there's always a second round included. Then I think it makes totally sense, and we're already seeing that for the federal elections. It's important to think about it where it makes sense, but it's way more complicated to implement that.
Tobias Bacherle, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.